This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey friends, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Rural Women Podcast this year, and we are taking a look back through the inspiring stories that have been shared with us throughout the years. Looking back through these interviews, there are women who have been successful, who have persevered, and who have been resilient. There are women who have shared their stories who may not farm or ranch or homestead or work in the business that they used to. Things may be different for them now, but I know their stories have impact. And I hope that this is a solid reminder for those of you who have shared your stories or who are inspired to share your stories. Our stories are forever changing. And just because we may not farm, ranch, or homestead the same, our lives might not look the same. There has been growth here. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it's a solid reminder for all of us to look back to see how far we've come. So my friends, I hope you enjoy these throwback podcast episodes coming your way, and thank you for being here and for helping me celebrate the incredible stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast over the last 5 years. Enjoy. Today, you'll meet Stéphanie Schiffgens. So for the listeners familiar with you, give us your background of who you are and where you're from.
So let's see. I was born and raised in the southwest of France on what we call in farm maraîchère. So my dad grew a lot of produce and was kind of instrumental in bringing into the valley where I grew up, a way of growing food year-round with large greenhouses. And sort of the technology came from the Netherlands, and it was in the 80s. So I grew up with a lot of produce rotations all the time. Lettuce, eggplant, tomatoes, strawberries, some cereals as well, corn, wheat, things like that. So yeah, I grew up around produce. And I also grew up we had horses. So I spent my childhood, eating good food and riding horses. And then in my early 20s, I made my way to the United States. I married into an American family and came here for what I thought would be a time, but sort of fell in love with the Pacific Northwest, and we sort of settled in the Pacific Northwest.
Tell us more about your farm in the Pacific Northwest and what you produce on Apple Tree Farm.
So it is what I call then a small, diversified urban farm. We have about 10 acres. And we run our sheep on about 6 or 7 of these 10 acres. with what we call intentional rotations and intentional grazing. So within a perimeter that is set around the farm, I move portable all the time. They eat an area. Whatever they don't eat, I mow and I move them to a different area. And this way I utilize the land that I have, in the best that I can, so that I don't have to import too much for the sheep on the farm. They're very efficient grazers. And then I have about half of an acre of gardens, including a large hoop house, which allows me to increase my season by starting earlier in the spring and by, I still have greens in my in-house. So I probably have maybe a month or two where there isn't a lot of fresh food. But the rest of the time, we're always able to, forage something, harvest something in the greenhouse. So that's kind of the setup. I run a small flock of Gotland sheep. I have about 15 ewes that I breed, some lamb. My breeding program is pretty essential to the financial well-being of my farm, if I can put it this way. I try to work really hard on producing good quality, so some ewes that will contribute to, making more Gotland sheep and some good rams. So that's what I do. Raise these Gotlands. They're if I can put it this way, a multi-purpose animal for us. We use their wool, so all their wool, either as raw fleeces or I process it into yarn and roving. Out of this yarn and roving, I do a lot of added value products. The sheep that are not quite good enough quality for breeding, they get harvested to feed families in our communities and our families. And then the pelts also get harvested and turn into garments. People like to purchase a pelt for a baby, or we have multiple pelts around here that keep us warm in the winter. So yes, they really, contribute to a big part of our farm income.
On this week's episode, you'll meet Marcia Cripps. For the listeners who may be unfamiliar with you, give us your background and how you got your start in ag.
So I am an agronomist. Right now I am based out of Southwest Michigan as a potato agronomist, but I started my career in California working with various crops, but specifically almonds and pistachios. And I grew up in Michigan, and obviously I couldn't get enough of the cold, so now I'm back. And yeah, I'm passionate about connecting people to science through agriculture, and that's why I really am glad to hear that there's people like you that reach out and want to share the stories of women in ag.
So tell us what initially got you interested in the field of agronomy.
So I grew up on a farm in Michigan, and my grandparents, they farmed apples and blueberries. My dad had corn, soybeans, alfalfa, and I didn't think I would end up going into agriculture. I studied something else in college, but I took one course. It was at Michigan State University called Intro to Agriculture, Agribusiness, and I really enjoyed that class and ended up spending more time doing that along with my crop and soil sciences classes. I originally took them as an elective, and I knew after that one semester that this was it for me, and I did an internship in Michigan, and that's what solidified it, and that's where we are today.
Tell us more about the experience that you've had with the various crops. You mentioned different crops in California, and now you're in Michigan with potatoes. Tell us more about the different experiences and the different crops that you've been able to work with.
It's been a real blessing. I'm very blessed that I grew up in Michigan. That's already a diverse state that's got multiple crop types. And then when I moved to California, it was, I believe the statistic is over 300 different crop types. So it was a challenge. There was definitely a learning curve, but I loved it. I was always learning something new, and I was challenged in a positive way. And from those multiple experiences, that actually helped me do really well in my current job with potatoes. So I went from working with multiple crops to one crop, and people don't realize it, but sometimes working with almonds, you learn about a product or you learn about something new, and that can cross over to potatoes. So it was a very positive experience and challenging experience to work with multiple crops, and I'm extremely blessed that I got that opportunity.
For sure.
So my name is Megan Harris. I'm from a small town in Virginia. I recently, I guess 10 years ago, moved across the Virginia line to North Carolina with my husband. I started out in agriculture as a child. I basically remember sitting on my grandma's porch with her sisters, snapping snap, shelling butter beans, growing a huge vegetable garden, and I'm pretty sure that's where my passion for agriculture got started. I continued on through high school in our local FFA chapter, volunteered on farms. I actually helped work cattle at my uncle's cattle farm with him and some other partners in his business. It's so hard for me to word things sometimes.
You're okay.
It's because the question's just so big. I guess because my whole life, Caitlin, is so diverse. Like, it's so weird to me that, okay, so I have my own farm and I run the farmer's market and I teach agriculture. And you know what I mean?
Those are a lot of things.
Yeah. And it's so hard, like, to tell my story sometimes, especially like on Instagram and stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's literally just, it's just one big diverse bomb of a million different things.
Well, that's great. And that's what we're going to break down today into each little piece. And we're not going to talk it all in one big umbrella story. So let's break it down.
Yeah, sounds good.
So growing up, you were involved in FFA. Tell us what some of your fondest memories were from FFA.
So in FFA, I did a lot of horse judging. I was really big in the horses in high school and in middle school. And so I would do the horse judging competitions with my favorite ag teacher, Miss Vaughn. She was amazing, and we're actually like best friends now, and she lives like 10 minutes down the road from me. She really kind of lit fire and fueled my passion for ag, because in high school, I didn't even know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was afraid to go to college because, you know, it's expensive. And Trina really said, listen, this is what you got to do. She even found the program that I went to when I went to Virginia Tech and everything. And she was like, this is going to get you started. I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew I wanted to be something in agriculture, but I really didn't know what. So in high school, that ag teacher really helped me really get to where I am now. Because if it wasn't for her, I really don't think that I would have pursued a degree in agriculture from Virginia Tech. And I probably would have never left home. But she really gave me the courage and the skills and just the really desire to get out of this town and go into college and, you know, figure out what I want to be and, you know, dream big. So I really appreciate her for that. And that was one of my fondest memories of FFA and ag in high school in general. She just had a huge impact on my life.
This week, you'll meet Abra Morawiec. Tell us about who you are and where you're from.
So my name is Abra. I am the co-owner and operator of Feisty Acres Farm. We're in Southfield, New York. And for those of you wondering where that is, that's on Long Island, as we like to say it. It's on the North Fork of Long Island. And we raise pasture-raised game birds and specialty poultry for direct sales to customers.
So let's talk more specifically about what you're producing on the farm and the different birds that you're producing. Tell us more about the different breeds and species of birds that you have on there. Because like you said, it's not a regular typical chicken farm. You guys have a lot of different unique birds.
Yeah, we have a lot of different unique birds because that's what the markets are calling for. We have plenty of farmers out here who are raising chickens, specifically Cornish cross broilers, which are a commercial hybrid chicken. And they grow very, very quickly on very low rain, and you're able to turn them over quickly and make profit from them, which is great. But there's so many people out there already doing that. Chris and I wanted to do something different because, again, like I said, when I was working for the other chicken farmer, people were looking for things that were familiar to them from home. So we have a lot of customers that are Latino, Eastern European, Asian, people who maybe were not born here but now live here in America and are Americans, but they are looking for food that is familiar. And a lot of the breeds that we raise are familiar to them. So we started with quail because they're small, they're easy to manage, and there was a huge demand for quail and quail eggs locally here on the North Fork. And now I find in the city, because almost every other culture regularly eats these tiny, fat, delicious birds. We started raising guinea hens and silky chickens. The guinea hens are originally a West African game bird, but now they're pretty well cemented in American and European agriculture. And they're similar in size and shape to a chicken, but their behavior is not all like chickens. Any of you guinea hen owners out there listening will know exactly what I'm talking about. They're skittish, they're loud. If you are not a guinea hen, they don't want anything to do with you. But they're great at eating pests, particularly ticks, and they're delicious. So we raise those guys. Very silky chickens, as I said before. They are a black-skinned, gray meat chicken with black bones. And these guys are very highly sought after by folk from Korea, Japan, and China. They're used a lot in soups and stocks. Also raise heritage breed chickens. And what I mean by heritage is they are not hybrid chickens. These are chicken breeds that have long storied histories, either here in the United States or in another country. And they always are able to mate naturally. So a male and a female, let's say barred rock, which is a heritage breed. If you mate a male barred rock with a female barred rock, you will get a barred rock. That's not the case with a lot of commercial hybrid chickens like the Cornish cross. If you mate a Cornish cross male with a Cornish cross female, you will not get a Cornish cross chicken. You will get a genetic throwback of one of the breeds that was used to make that chicken.
This week, you'll meet Mickey Willenbring. For my listeners who are unfamiliar with you, Mickey, can you give us your background and your journey into agriculture?
Oh, you're going to have to forgive me because I don't usually talk about myself. I normally talk about my animals. My name's Mickey. I am an Oglala Lakota and Puerto Rican combat veteran, U.S. Army for way too long for polite company. And then I found myself, long story super short, I got catastrophic injured on deployment in Iraq. And when I came home, I had a really hard time integrating back into society. I had all of these great ideas of what I was going to do with my life after I retired, but I did not expect retirement to come early. And I certainly didn't expect to become a disabled veteran. I had a lot of problems with internalized age and not being able to accept my own physical limitations after being injured. I had a lot of problems with PTSD because of the things that I had experienced. And I tried to find a kind of a new path through life. I had been a mechanic in the Army and a 50 cal gunner and Mark 19 gunner. And so I had a hard time finding ways to take those job skills and translate them back into a civilian life where I had such a strong physical disability that being a mechanic was no longer an option. Originally, I had gone to college and was doing an online degree program to get my degree in natural resource management and policy. And I thought, I'll go through this program and then I'll apply to law school, get my degree in environmental law, and then go to work for either my own tribe or another tribe on environmental policy over rangeland management, which is really a big thing. But while I was going through the degree program, I realized that my PTSD impacted my ability to deal with other people. And it impacted my ability to live in an urban environment. And I realized that a whole bunch of things were kind of stacking up against me. And I had to find a way to navigate myself back to a point of balance.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I know I speak on behalf of my listeners here. Thank you for your service and what you've done for your country. And full circle, I'm misty over here. That's what we say on the podcast, Nikki, when I get a little teary-eyed behind the microphone. So,
oh gosh,
take us back to 2010 and how began the journey of building your ranch, Dot Ranch. You found these sheep, and tell us how you grew from there.
Well, it's kind of once again, a lot of things kind of fell together almost by accident. Craigslist plays a recurring role in this. So when Craigslist and being a veteran, it's really this land that I purchased belonged to a World War II veteran who was a Navy longshoreman. And somebody else had actually bid on it before me, and he had accepted bid, and then I outbid them. But he had to let their deal play out all the way. So they ended up not being able to meet the closing date. And so I ended up with this property, but I had to jump through all these crazy hoops to get, because I didn't qualify for regular financing because I was unemployed, because I was disabled. My income was freaking crappy because my only income was from my disability. And at the time, the only way that I could buy the land was by making a 25% down payment. So I had to sell all the silver and gold that had been collected over the years. And I ran these big fundraisers online with the gaming community, actually with the video gaming community, who kind of helped me through my injuries over the years. And all this, a lot of times when you're disabled, you kind of get stuck in one spot. And because I had to have so many surgeries and I spent so many months being unable to walk, video gaming as a way to kind of cope with the stress. And the gaming community rallied up and signal boosted all of my auctions so that everything went for way more than I expected it to. And I ended up raising over $100,000 in 30 days.
When women support each other, great things happen. Join myself and FCC for Connecting Women in Agriculture, a free 4-part virtual event series celebrating our contributions to the industry and sharing insights to overcome challenges. Each of these 4 sessions highlight a different expert and topic. Gain strategies to help you through adversity, get tips for managing your farm finances, delve into HR practices for family-owned farms, and get advice for transition planning and navigating change. Don't miss your chance to connect. Register today at fcc.ca/events.
So my name is Ashley Clark. You can call me Ash, but my husband and I purchased our farm and our house in 2016. We named it Sacred Roots Maple, 68 acres of literally just a maple sugar bush. So Ben was in this farm working for about 15 years prior to purchasing it, and the time was just right. It lined up for us to be able to take over and continue the traditions and the practices of the previous owner, and for us to be able to keep moving forward with that. So that's essentially how we got the start, just Ben being exposed to everything and having the experience, and then for us to be in the right place, the right time for us to be able to take over the process. And we're located in West Shazy, New York, which is what we consider upstate New York, even though if you were to ask other people, they think it's like Syracuse or Albany, but upstate New York, about 20 minutes from the Canadian border.
There you go. You're almost Canadian.
Pretty much.
So with maple syrup, are there different grades that you can get? Like I'm just thinking of grades of beef or anything like that. Are there grades of maple syrup?
Yes, there are. So the newer standard or the new classifying system, we're all right now on grade A. And so you have grade A golden, you have grade A amber, grade A dark, and grade A very dark. And as you progress down the line, the taste is going to be more flavorful, really strong, robust flavor. And generally the grade is impacted by a few things. One is and the most common that we talk about is just the timing of the season. So generally at the beginning of the season, that's when we make our lighter syrup, our grade A golden, and then our grade A amber. And then as the weather changes and it warms up, because it's a bacterial thing, that's when we start to produce more of the darker maple syrup, to the point where sometimes as the season gets so close to the end, I've tried it and it's just like not my favorite thing. And that's the stuff that we don't even sell. Usually when we get to that point, we just know that the season is over. But that's a big part of the grading process. The other thing that can affect grade is, like I said, the cleanliness of, the maple process. So not keeping sap in the tanks for too long, making sure that you're cleaning out the tanks every night, just really having a good maintenance process.
Let's start. Where are you from? Who are you? Who is Becca Matthews?
Well, I originally grew up in Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee. And even though we lived out in the country, farmers, we had a dog and a cat, and that was the extent of my animal anything until I married my husband. So I didn't really, I guess I did horses and stuff, but that was just, with friends. It's not like I had my own anything. But my family were not farmers. It was I think it was my mother's, her grandparents. They were dairy farmers on both sides, but that there has been no farming in our family since then. So I guess technically I'm a first generation farmer, though I've never really felt like it.
You're using your sheep's milk to make cheese. So what kind of cheese were you making?
So we make primarily a cheddar cheese. And I do they're not really two different types, but I do a soft cheese, which is basically your cheese curd. And then I do I think it's a 60-day aged cheddar. And so those are the only two that I right now, and that I will, once we get our certifications, that I will be doing to sell. And then eventually I will add a bunch more onto that, because there are so many options for cheeses out there. And I think with the sheep milk, because with milk, you can get, so for every pound of milk, you get about 1.5 pounds of cheese, which, is a 0.5 pound more than you get from goat or cow. So being able to make more out of it, and to me, I just think there are so many different options to do.
Yeah, for sure. So for somebody who has never tasted sheep's milk, you said it was a little bit sweeter, but in regards to cheese, is there much of a difference between, let's say, like a cow's cheddar cheese versus a sheep's cheddar cheese?
Not a whole lot, no. It will be a little creamier because she's thicker, so it will be a little creamier than your regular cow cheese, but taste-wise, it is really, really comparable.
That's very cool. Today, you'll meet Melissa Ballard.
All right. My name's Melissa, like you said already. My husband, Josh, and I live in Kentucky. We live in Shelbyville, Kentucky, which is kind of central Kentucky. We raise beef cattle. We have a business called Bluegrass Beef. We raise 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef. Josh is also a veterinarian, and I am a part-time radio DJ on top of all the farming things that we do.
Tell us more about the life cycle of the cattle on your farm. You guys kind of transitioned from doing maybe the more typical way of raising your cattle to transitioning to grass-fed. So just take us on the basic life cycle of an animal on your farm.
Yes. Okay. Great question. Most of our cows are commercial cows, and then we do have a small but growing herd of registered red Angus cattle. We're getting more into the registered side of things, but we are a cow-calf operation. So that means most of you guys probably already know, but we have mama cows that have babies every year. And so kind of where the differences come in, if a cow is born on our farm, it will, if it's a girl, it'll most likely go into being a replacement heifer. We'll keep her. She'll most likely stay as part of our breeding herd as long as she does her job and gets pregnant and all of that. If she is a female that does not breed or is a male, a bull calf, they will become part of our beef herd. So we finish, like you said, Caitlin, we started more conventionally. Before we were finishing ground beef, we would sell our calves at weaning time. We might keep back some replacement heifers, but we would sell all the steers just at the stockyards or whatever. When we started finishing beef, now all those males get kept back for our beef program. Grass-fed beef takes a little longer to finish than grain finished. So most of our beef animals are finished between 24 to 30 months of age. So at that point, they're harvested for beef. And then if they were a girl that went back into our breeding program, they will be bred. We usually breed them to have their first baby at around 2 years of age. Does that answer your question?
That absolutely answers my question. You did well. Yay! You did well. Today, you'll meet Colah B. Tawkin.
How I got my start was feeling a sense of conviction when I had made so many changes in so many ways in adapting, like accepting the natural parts of myself, like as a Black person, accepting my natural texture of hair was really the start of the journey. We call it going natural, right? And so as I'm considering like what kind of things I'm taking in or not taking in, I just start to recognize after some years, it was several years, I didn't just get there overnight, but I recognized that I felt convicted about the fact that I was not like locally sourcing my food. And then I kind of come across this article that was indicating that the most hyper local way to get your food is to grow it. And that really planted a seed of, like I said, feeling convicted. I was just like, oh, okay, I should do that, right? I should do that. And after, I think it was at least a year from that realization, that I actually went and just kind of intuitively said, I could grow some stuff. So that was really the beginning of my, physically doing it. Did it go well? No. But the first attempt did not go well. But that was the beginning.
For sure. So, Colah, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced so far when it comes to the world of podcasting and the world of horticulture?
Ooh, wow. Okay, I like that I haven't been asked this question before. Wow. Biggest challenges kind of like basically at the intersection of podcasting and horticulture. Learning how to do all the things. Like, I'm literally making this up as I go along.
Right.
So that's been my biggest challenge. And then not having resources. Really, I just had this whole revelation just now. And so I'm glad I can share it with you. I love it when this happens. I just realized that when I started gardening, I started in a very similar way as when I started podcasting. So when I first started gardening, I didn't really have a lot of understanding about how this whole thing worked, the equipment included, didn't really know what I was doing, just being kind of intuitive about how I wanted it to work. And similar to podcasting, I didn't know what microphone to get or whatever. I didn't start with a microphone. I started using Anchor like so many podcasters have. And shout out to Anchor for being such a great resource and making it so simplified. So I started out with not so great, very cheap little smartphone. And that was definitely at least the first season of Black in the Garden, was me just not having really great resources or, just like I said, I literally figured it out as I went along, but I knew what I wanted it to be. So that helped me to keep going, because I was like, well, if I just keep going, then eventually I will get it to be what I'm envisioning it to be. And so that was dope how I could make that correlation between the very two things. So yes, that is the answer. I'm putting my pencil down.
Well, my name is Elaine Vandiver, and my husband and I have a little 10-acre farm in Walla Walla, Washington, where we primarily raise alpacas for their fiber, and we have a cut flower farm as well.
Both things sound like so much fun, and I am excited to learn more about both of them. So let's talk more about the llamas that you also received with the purchase of your homestead. Did you know anything about llamas before you bought this land?
Not at all. And when she told us about it, my previous job with the government dealt with writing contracts. And so when she said, oh, yeah, the llamas come with the place, I was like, yeah, I read that contract like 500 times. There was no mention of a llama in there. But at that point, we were just kind of like, okay, we have 2 llamas. So I had no idea anything about like what they were used for, how you care for them. And so those first couple weeks, I spent time just going down the internet rabbit hole of, what do you do with llamas? And that's how I found out, oh, llamas are related to alpacas. Oh, those are so cute. And I had seen it before. And then it was like, oh, and then there's an alpaca farm about 25 miles from here. Oh, maybe we should go check that out. And that's kind of how that evolved. And we over that farm, and then we brought part of that farm to our farm. So
that's so funny. So for the listeners, there could be a few of them. I'm included. I don't really know anything about llamas or alpacas. So tell us more about them and what the difference between the two is. I'm sure the alpacas get mistaken for llamas all of the time. Like, I even just think in like mainstream media and like people and their obsession with llamas in pajamas and all of the things, right? What are some of the differences between llamas and alpacas?
Oh, no, and I was in the same category. So they are in the same species. They're all camelids, camels being at the top species. So the primary difference between a llama and alpaca, in my personal opinion, is size. Llamas are about 2/3 bigger than alpacas. There's a couple other little nuanced things about the size and placement of their ear and tails. For the most part, side by side to any old person, llamas are bigger than alpacas.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.